The pandemic has meant that the ways we work and think about work have changed. But we know that there are still barriers that mean disabled people, people with mental health conditions, and neurodivergent people continue to be disadvantaged at work in ways that non-disabled people aren't. This shows up in the employment gap, the pay gap, and the type of work that's available. At Barnwood, we wanted to use our influence to do something about it. We knew how the barriers showed up, but not exactly what these looked and felt like, or how we could support employers to dismantle them. Welcome to the Empowered Employers podcast. We are Barnwood Trust, and today we are speaking with a group of experts with lived experience of these barriers that make up a team of people who, alongside commercial employers, have supported the design of the campaign, Empowered Employers. This group of experts by lived experience have been meeting to discuss what we want employers to know, covering subjects such as flexible working, workplace adjustments, and applying for a job. Today we will share with you some of the conversations that have helped develop the thinking behind the campaign. If you're an employer, a disabled person, a person with a mental health condition, or a neurodivergence, this podcast might be for you. This episode focuses on views about and experiences of adjustments being made at work to help remove disabling barriers, including how small changes can make a big difference.
I think most employers probably think that they are expensive, a lot of hassle, not worth it. I mean, we've obviously done a lot of work with this, and we know that reasonable adjustments don't have to cost a lot. Sometimes they don't cost anything. I think that a lot of employers will think, it means I'm going to have to pay to have ramps put in the building, I'm going to have a lift put in, or I'm going to have all the doors widened. And sometimes, that might be an option, depending on the building. Not everybody's as lucky as Barnwood Trust to have a super fantastic accessible building. But sometimes it could be something really simple. It could just be a different chair or a desk that is set at a higher level, a different keyboard. There's so many things that it could just be. They've done studies on the brightness of the lights in an office. Might affect how somebody's able to do their work. I think it's going to be individual to each person, but I think most employers probably have that kind of knee-jerk reaction that, oh my God, what's this going to cost? And is it going to be worth it?
I think that some people don't even know what to even suggest and think that you can do your job in the normal circumstances. And actually, if the desk was just raised a little bit, that would help the individual so much.
Have you found that having that kind of adjustments helped you?
Oh, definitely, because it helps my back and it helps get into the desk.
I think from some of the employers that I've come across, I think some of them think as little as possible. There shouldn't really be the need. If you need adjustments, then is the job for you. And I think it also depends on the amount of staff they have and the willingness to either be able to compensate, or whether the team is so small that they're specifically looking for someone who is able to take on a role and maybe take on a role a bit more than the role entails, if you get what I mean.
But there are so many adjustments, aren't there, as well, that don't just benefit. So actually, if you're an organisation and you do need to put a ramp in, if you're a shop, actually, that ramp is going to be used by customers and by tradespeople and visitors as well. And I think it's really interesting, actually, that I think there's this idea from employers that actually if you make an adjustment for one person, then everyone's going to want an adjustment, and then it becomes this huge, expensive process. But like you said, Wayne, actually sometimes they cost nothing at all. Actually, wouldn't it be great if everyone could just ask for what they need as well? I mean, there are some things that people, need, but there's some things that are preferences. But actually, standard work works for so few people. And the benefits of making adjustments are so massive as well. There's a statistic that says something like 80% increase in retention if you just make adjustments for people. Yeah, and that could be lighting or large print or loads of stuff.
I think sometimes they miss the fact that, yes, if you've got to put a ramp to your building, it might cost you, let's put a figure of £30,000. You can get a disabled facilities grant to the value of £30,000 that will pay for it. But you've only got to do it once. You don't have to do it then for every single person. And that ramp doesn't just then benefit people that are wheelchair users. Somebody pushing a pram, somebody with limited mobility, somebody that walks with a cane, somebody maybe with a prosthetic that struggles with steps. You do it once and that's it, it's then done. And it's such an obvious visual to everybody else that actually that this organisation thought about access to their building.
Andrea, I'm just wondering what adjustments have helped you, perhaps?
Well, I've had a desk, a chair and some software which I use from working from home. But in my previous role, I had adjustments to a task that I couldn't do. So that task was given to somebody else. Like it was putting things away in the store cupboard. So that was an adjustment. Or parking near the building so it's easier for me to get into the office. So there's all sorts of adjustments that can be put in place if an employer would listen to our needs.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It doesn't have to be anything, as we were saying, it doesn't have to be the ramp. It just has to be that thought and asking, what would make it easier. So yeah, thank you for that. You've highlighted really well there, Andrea, how smaller adjustments can make a huge difference. Free adjustments as well. Did anybody want to come in any more about adjustments with regard to employers and what's helped you, what could have helped you?
It's such a very, very simple adjustment that one of the Barnwood Trust members has actually made for me. So I have a visual impairment and I struggle with smaller text. So I don't know whether to name her. Whenever I get an email from this person, she has set the text size for emails to come to me in a large print format, which costs nothing, because it's an email. Literally probably takes her seconds to click on a box and change the size of the print. But it just means that when I get the email, I don't have to then spend time zooming in and out to read the text. I can read it straight off.
Do you mind me mentioning as well that removing the footer, I think that can be quite helpful as well. And I think you taught me that if you're using a screen reader, it'll read everything. So don't send a whole load of garb underneath the signature.
It's one thing that I get really annoyed with is when people use a reply to all. So you're trying to get the gist of a message, and like you say, you've got a footer, and a footer will often have so much information in there nobody reads. Let's be honest. Yeah, there are terms and conditions and addresses and telephone numbers and charity numbers and God knows what else, and nobody really reads it. So yeah, having all that when you're using a screen reader, it just rattles all this off. So to be able to cut that out, especially when you've got people that they always hit reply to all, so you've just got this endless stream of text. Yeah, it can be a little bit annoying for people that use screen readers, especially if the answer to the question is yes, okay.
I work in a small team in housekeeping, and obviously when you gather up all the sheets and towels and other linen, there's quite a heavy amount there. So my team have said that I can leave it outside the doors and they come along and just take it for me across to the shed where it goes. So they understand that. I did ask whether I could have a little trolley, but health and safety, I think, comes in the way of that sometimes. And I think sometimes that, I would say, goes a bit too far, because they kind of made fun that it would be my skateboard. And then, of course, when the GM heard about that, it was an immediate, no, she can't have that, as if I was going to stand on it with my bag and whisk off down to the shed. It was like, well, that's not quite how I'm seeing it. But the group I work with have taken it upon themselves to, that they'll do that part of the job for me.
But also everyone's just, that thing that about, doing the parts of a job that actually work better for you and handing over some of the stuff that doesn't. like since the pandemic as well, that's kind of become like much more normal, hasn't it? Like you have job carving, so it's part of flexible working. And this is the other thing where employers have gone, oh yeah, not everyone is fantastic at every single job. Actually, if people are allowed to decide what aspects of a job they're really good at and pass over the things that they're not so good at, then actually this also benefits our business. And again, it's that thing of like employers only offering it now post-pandemic that, you know, they've realised that actually people are really good at managing their time and their responsibilities, and flexible working's an adjustment that I guess we've all got used to. But yeah, I mean, job carving I think is being talked about more and more, and I think that's exactly what you were describing, Andrea. Because I can't do admin. It's not even just a preference. I genuinely just can't do it. I was just wondering, would everyone feel comfortable asking for an adjustment? And if so, what has an employer done to make you feel comfortable asking for an adjustment? Or what could they do? How could they sort of signal actually that they were an employer who was going to be receptive to you saying, actually, I need this adjustment within my workplace? For example, is it them being very explicit about adjustments at interview or on the application forms, or is it about a line manager making a real effort with the staff and asking, and it being like a standard practice? Like, what would make us feel comfortable? Because I actually wouldn't have known about adjustments before I started working at Barnwood Trust. Like, no one has ever said to me before. In fact, I think they did at college and school. I got a disabled student allowance at college, and I got like Dragon software, which is the recite, you sort of recite it and it types it out for you. Yeah. But I've never had that at work, and so I just didn't know that adjustments were a thing. What would signal to you that an employer was going to receive this information like in good faith? And
I think on most applications now they ask you, do you consider yourself to have a disability? So that should, in my mind, should be then a prompt for them that if you do get through the interview stage, maybe even at the interview stage, you know, prompt them to ask the questions, well, what could we do? If you're leaving it down to us to kind of come forward, then I think sometimes people will be a bit shy about asking for stuff like that, because it might be seen as, well, you know, you haven't even got the job yet and you're asking for this, that and whatever, when we've got another applicant that isn't asking for anything. Let's go with the other applicant. So you've kind of second guessed yourself and you go, well, I won't say anything. But I think if you're ticking that box on the application form, I think most application forms now should be asking this question. You know, do you consider yourself to have a disability or mental health issue? I think if they weren't, then that might be a bit of a red flag for me anyway, because they obviously haven't considered that. But I think, yeah, they should either, when you're at maybe second stage interview, and they're asking, you know, what can we do to help you? Or when you're going through your first week of training or induction, however it is, yeah, and take these things on board. Obviously, if it's something like you're a wheelchair user and there are going to be some difficulties getting around the building, if that hasn't raised some awareness in them, then there's an issue there, I think. I don't think it's wrong for them to ask. You know, if they're serious about hiring people with a disability, then, you know, they should go the whole hog for me.
Thank you. And Rachel, as someone in the group that's recently found a job, how did you navigate asking for an adjustment, if you did at all?
Well, they said at the interview, they said that they can get a desk that's adjustable, and they have investigated it, with a table that can go up and down. They said it's quite posh. They said they're going to get it costed, but I don't know when it's going to happen, or the job's going to happen.
I had access to work to do an assessment, so they can suggest certain things that I was struggling with. Also, adjustments to my work pattern, which I discussed in my supervision. So we discussed changing my work pattern so I'll be able to deliver the job quite professionally and not be under pressure. Well, one of the adjustments is that I had WordQ, which is a software package to help me with any letters, emails, writing reports. So that software was an adjustment.
would people feel confident asking for adjustments?
I think there's still probably quite a bit of a feeling there's a stigma around if you ask. Either you wouldn't get the job or they would be questioning whether you're still capable of having the position. That was put to me earlier last year when I was having difficulty, and then I mentioned access to work and my rights to be able to have adjustments, and then they haven't asked again. But they have come forward with helping me with the bags. And actually, one member of staff a couple of months ago, I went in, he could see that I was not looking so good, and I just said I'm exhausted, and because my condition, I do suffer with quite a bit of fatigue, and he actually said, would it help if we worked together today? And I agreed, so we actually did more rooms than I would do on my own, but I did one portion which I could do and didn't fatigue me more, and he did the others. So, I think it's working with your team and having them on board enables, the team to work smoothly. So once you've got your employees with you to understand.
So actually your experience is totally different to the idea that if one person asks for an adjustment, everyone says, hey, I want an adjustment. It's much more that actually if you need an adjustment, the people that work around you have been really supportive of that.
I'm lucky, but then because we know the team so well, you actually do tend to find that other people need adjustments too. Other people have needs. So we work well as knowing each other's individual needs, and we can help each other. I mean, I sometimes will stay on work longer if I feel that one of my other employees that I work with is under stress, because when he gets under stress, he can get low. So I'll sort of say, I'll stay on and help where I can, and others do that too. So it's working with it's having a good colleague working pattern, I think, really. One other thing I was going to say, because obviously as a group we know that my husband has become ill over the last few years, and his workplace also made an adjustment that instead of being out on the shop floor anymore because he was unable to stand, they've now put him permanently on the till, and that's been helpful for him. So he stays in work, he does the same hours, and they're even open to looking at swapping a day that he particularly finds quite difficult and challenging. So they're looking at that too. So they've come on board with him.
Thank you for that. You've really highlighted the importance of that human element of how adjustments work, getting the other staff on board and having the right attitudes in the workplace.
Obviously 83% of people acquire their disabilities, and I think it's whilst they're working age as well. Like a huge amount of people acquire them whilst they're working age, and of course the longer people stay in work, the more likely you are to acquire a disability, because it happens with age, doesn't it? And disabilities change as well, don't they? And actually your needs change, and what you need as an adjustment changes.
I think the employment landscape has changed as well, maybe for the better or maybe for the worse, but I think certainly COVID has probably pushed us on a few years. Now you can't help but see in the news a discriminatory case about somebody with a disability. There was one only today about a lad in Ireland working for a large discount supplier that was discriminated. The fear that employers now have of potentially having to pay out tens of thousands of pounds has almost kind of given them the kick up the backside to actually look at their policies, look at their procedures and go, well actually, we need to change things. I think for a larger employer, you've got the part of the organisation, the HR, whose kind of job it is that all these things come under. So they should be, working proactively to kind of head anything off. But it is great, as Christine said, when you've got a team around you and they accept you for everything you are, because they know that there's some parts of the job that they're not so good at. So, you have each other's back. Unfortunately, it doesn't always seem that employers have your back.
At the end of the day, it is their responsibility, isn't it? Like you actually, I suppose in some ways you shouldn't have to be relying on people's kindness, should you? Actually, so much of this should just be standard. As soon as you get a job, it's do you need a workplace adjustment? Or, if you're having an appraisal, it's, is there anything that would make work easier for you? And then you're not having to ask, are you? I was thinking that way when you were talking about the email font size. Wouldn't it be great if that was just a standard? You know, if it wasn't even an adjustment. It was just like, you know, we all just use this format.
Yeah, because it's not just people with a visual impairment. You know, anybody that wears glasses would honestly say, you know what, I could do with it being a little bit bigger.
But that's also the same with people with dyslexia, isn't it? Often they have coloured overlays and need for colour, and almost everything's done on black and white, on white paper. We're all dyslexic in my family, but we've all got different types of dyslexia. So my daughter finds that if the paper's more of a pale blue or a grey, it takes off, because white can be quite bright and can make the letters move a lot more. It's just depending on what type of dyslexia you have.
Could I just ask, you said that you didn't have much experience of employment in the past before the work that you're doing currently. Do you think that knowing about your rights and knowing that adjustments and flexible working was something that should have been given to you would have made you more confident to look for work?
It possibly would have, but like I've said before, what put me off was the reaction of that assistant when I handed over my CV and she said the right things, but it was like, what are you gonna do? She didn't have to say that, but it was all in the eyes. You could see that was what she was meaning, and that was without going to the manager or anything like that. And I never heard anything back, so that put me off work completely, which was what I thought. But yes, if I had known, I might well have looked at it different. And because I might have been able to go back to them and say, well, I've read about these things, is there anything we can do?
Yeah, it sounds like it would have helped in some ways too, have known your
It probably would have done, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story.
Right, as a parent working as an advocate for my son and finding him a job, with the particular job that he's got now, I went in and I spoke to the manager. I went straight to the manager and asked and requested that he have a trial work experience, and then the three of us sat down, and between us all we talked about what he would need, what he would find, what the employer was looking for. It was quite lucky that the employer actually was looking for evening staff, and my son's sleep pattern he doesn't go to bed at night, so to speak, so it worked well that he would work in the evenings, and the employer actually asked what days would suit, because my son had other things he wanted to do during the week. So he was, it worked really well. So the employer was happy for him to start off with a couple of hours and work up to, I think he does 4 now. He was happy for him to do Fridays and Saturdays, but I think that's because my son was happy for that, and any youngsters they had always want to go out on a Friday, Saturday. So it worked well. And then they actually put in with team members that came forward to say that they were happy to work with my son. They knew him from being a customer, and also that they'd also had experience of people on the spectrum. So he had people he could go to. And then we also talked about his pathological demand condition and what that entailed. And then we talked about the language to use with my son. So, for example, if they wanted him to do a certain aisle, they were not to say, I want you to face up that aisle, because that was a negative. And so they asked me, and also they asked my son what would be better, and it would be something like, well, could you help us this evening by sorting out this aisle? So there was no negative. It was a polite ask. And the other thing that they've put in place, if need be, and it has worked on occasions, is that he is welcome to go into the staff room if he feels overwhelmed. And there has been occasions when he's gone in there to calm down, usually to ring me and talk it through. And we find that it would be helpful for staff to have some training about the conditions my son has, because they didn't know quite how to handle his manner and how to get him back onto the shop floor to work. And that's why he rung me, and I talked it through. And then I talked it through with the supervisor, and then the three of us got my son back on the floor.
So what you've just described there and illustrated really brilliantly is how it can work well when you've got the right employer in place, when someone's got an advocate, when the team have got behind that, and when there's a sort of shared knowledge of, in a community, of a person. And that's almost like the ideal, isn't it? And even there, that it's not perfect. There are some things that could be learnt, but what a good illustration of how it could be for people when you've got all the right components in place. So that was really, really good. Thank you for sharing that with us.
It's really interesting hearing every talk, because obviously when you're talking as well, it's so about the individual needs again, isn't it? It's actually like your son needed some things that were very specific to your son, but also just thinking about, when we're talking about the white paper, and actually it's the same with fonts, isn't it? It's actually all these standard things that we do, and we do them like automatically, that just disadvantage lots and lots and lots of people. And, actually changing a font, because the font isn't there that's good for dyslexic people. I can't remember if it's Comic Sans or something. It's the one that no one likes. But there are lots of things that we do as standard that actually there is no particular reason for them, but they do disadvantage, disabled people, neurodiverse people.
One of those, good example of that is working in an office from the hours of 9 and 5. It's just because that's what we've always done. And the pandemic showed us that actually that doesn't have to be the case.
If I'd known 20 years ago when I became disabled, I wouldn't know anything about my rights. I was just given that, you've got to have early retirement. You're not going to have to live in Yorkshire anymore. You'll have to live by mum and dad to look after you and see your son. You can't cope. Actually, I can cope. I wouldn't want to do that job because it was a factory, but at least I could have got a little bit of a payout or something to help me, to compensate, to find me more work. Or I was struck off and I was instantly medically retired.
It's frustrating, and you didn't know your rights.
I didn't know my rights, no. And as a technologist, you're running around the factory. You wouldn't be able to do this job anyway. So, but there are other jobs that I could have done, like gone into different departments, like purchasing or sales or technical, But you just didn't know about these things 20 years ago at all.
Interesting. We've got two manufacturing organisations on the learning. They are partners on this employment campaign. So it'll be really interesting to see how they manage a factory floor and sort of apply, I guess, what they've learned about. I don't know if there'll be I suppose it's difficult, isn't it, to know if you've got shift workers, if you can apply flexible working or the adjustments that they can make. It'll be, I guess, individual to employers as well, won't it?
Are they the one of them's the sponsor?
We've got Renishaw,
and Hydro, who are both big manufacturing organisations as well.
It's not just factory floor work. An organisation the size of Renishaw is absolutely massive. They employ thousands of people, so there are always other departments that you could work in. You could still work on the shop floor. It's just the employer having the willing to create those jobs or adapt the jobs that are already there. I mean, we talk about flexible starting and finishing hours. Like you say, with shift work, sometimes that's not always going to be possible. If you're working in a shop, in a doctor's surgery, things like that, where you're open for certain times of day or you have time-specific appointments, not always going to be possible. And unfortunately, we seem to be almost moving away from having flexible working and working from home. The employers want people back in the offices. I get it. If you've spent X amount on a fancy office and nobody's coming into work, then what are you spending your money on? I think it would be helpful for many employers to kind of take a look at, what they're doing, what their procedures are, and almost update them, I suppose, rewrite them for the 21st century. We went through lockdown and many people work from home. But whilst as good as a scheme that was, it also then introduced some underhanded tactics. So some employers would then put software onto your computer to make sure that you were actually being productive during those hours of 9 to 5. If your job is just to go through paperwork, admin work, and you would normally work 9 to 5, well, what's to say that you can't do that job from 11:30 in the morning through till 7, 8 o'clock at night? You might not be a morning person. You might struggle to get yourself out of bed, get yourself in that mental place to do your 8-9 hours work. So if you started later and you're just working from home, you're in a safe space. You haven't got your work colleagues that may be interrupting you every 5 minutes with, can you just look at this or whatever, and you can work later. I don't see that that's a problem, but
I was going to ask you about that actually. Because you've got lived experience of having those kind of flexible adjustments made. How's that been for you? Can you remind me what your start times are? And
Well, on Monday I work for 2 hours. On a Wednesday I work for 3 hours and 2 hours on a Friday, which I can organise my workload and my meetings on Teams.
did you have that in the beginning, or is that something you had to come to eventually or ask for?
Well, because I got my job whilst the pandemic was on. Some of it I had to ask when I had my supervision with my line manager. But also I did work years ago, and I did have a bit of flexible working, which, because it helped me to get into the office and that, so they would let me finish a bit earlier so I didn't get in the rush when people were rushing out at 5 o'clock.
It's a really good example, actually, because apparently, one of the massive benefits of working from home is not having to do the commute, which lots and lots of people can find. Apparently it does really raise your stress levels as well. But I was just thinking more about the sort of factory work as well. And actually, when we're doing some visits to talk to commercial organisations about what would be supportive of them, I went along with a colleague to one of the manufacturing organisations, and he said it's really likely that you will find more people with neurodiversities in working in factories, actually, because there's such a specific way that we're expected to relate to each other, and there are so many sort of unspoken rules about how you interact with your colleagues that actually sometimes it's just really, really exhausting, and it's easier not to have to. So actually, and I guess as well, there's some sort of order as well to the factory work as well. So you do quite often find people, or he thought you quite often found people in neurodiversities in factories as well. And I guess that's partly why it's really important to have those commercial organisations on board as well. But I guess as well, it just goes back to that thing of all those expectations that are placed on people that aren't actually part of the job role. So, for example, all the relational stuff, all those conversations that you have to have. We sort of talk about, isn't it a shame that that flexible working means that you don't have all of those water cooler conversations. For some people, those water cooler conversations are really, really stressful. But there's an assumption that actually if you are in the workplace, it's almost part of your role. So it's like actually, you have to fulfill your tasks, and then you also have to have those conversations, and you have to be, a certain way to your colleagues. And that's, I find it really exhausting. And sometimes actually, I think I probably choose to work from home just to avoid some of that extra work.
I think avoiding the commute is a definite plus. There are many employers who still think it's okay in the 21st century to demand that you turn up 15 minutes before your shift starts. You can't clock in, you can't, punch your time card, but you're expected to be there ready so that when you start at 9 o'clock, you're there ready to go. It's like, well, hang on, why am I giving you 15 minutes every day? So being able to work from home and having that flexible time. So if you don't clock in at 9 o'clock on the dot, you clock in at 1:15. We all use computers now. These things can easily be tracked. I think to stick to this kind of 9 to 5 regimented kind of thing, it just seems archaic, really. If I can turn up and do a job, and I can do it in 5 hours, should I not then be able to clock off? Or do I have to then do another 3 hours of extra work? Because somebody that comes in that isn't doing their work in that time, and they or maybe deliberately stretch it out, who's benefiting here?
So interesting as well, because it also comes back to the 4-day working week, doesn't it? As in, like, people are really good at knowing how much time they've got and how much they can get done within a certain time period. So you go down from 5 days, which is the standard again, it's just accepted that we all do 7.5 hours 5 days a week, and you take it down to 4 days, and people know exactly how much they can get done in the 4 days, and productivity doesn't go down at all. And I guess on the other hand, you do get, if you're expecting people to come into the office, you get presenteeism, don't you? And I, off record, can spend a lot of time on Facebook, but I'm still at my desk.
With mine, because of the fatigue I have told work that I may take longer, so I'm happy to stay after the time in order to not have to rush to get my work done. So long as I've got rooms ready by 3 o'clock, the other rooms I can do after. So often I will stay an extra hour because I've done it at a pace that I can manage to get everything they want me to do done. And again, it comes back to the team. But if I haven't completed one room and it might not be 3 o'clock, but the customer, holiday maker, whoever has come, then somebody will jump on with me, finish it off so that the customer can get into their room. But I've said that from the beginning, and that hasn't seemed to be a problem. One other thing I was just thinking of when you were saying that is back in 2002, my husband worked for the London Ambulance Service, and there came a point when he was told that because there was over a certain amount of staff working in the London Ambulance, he could ask for a family-friendly shift pattern. So long as it was all right with them and it worked, he could possibly do that. And actually, we wanted to move, so we moved from London up to Gloucestershire. Because of our son, we wanted better schooling and better healthcare, and we felt that we could get it up here. So he actually devised his timetable, same hours, and it was all done around the train times as well, because he still went from Morton-in-Marsh, North Cotswolds, all the way to London Paddington, and then took the tube to Waterloo, and he did that for 6 years. That was in 2001. He found out about that because somebody actually said, because we've got a certain amount of employees, we can offer you a family-friendly shift pattern. So if they can do it for that reason, then they should be able to do it for others.
Thank you for that. On a point made earlier about neurodivergence and motivation and those water cooler conversations, because I think that's a really important point as well, is how people view their work when they're actually at work. So I was listening to a podcast recently where they said that the person was neurodivergent, and when they went to work, they went to do their job. Whereas it seemed that some people had jobs, went there for the money and the social life, but it was a slightly different motivation, and I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, it can be really tiring, I think, having those social interactions alongside doing a task if you're not neurotypical, perhaps. And that was completely off what we were talking about. I wanted to say it earlier.
I was just going to go back to the reasonable adjustments. I know for a fact that if it was me, I wouldn't be able to bring myself to say or ask for anything. I would just deal with what I was given. If they came to me, yes, I may be able to bring myself and say, well, this would be easier. But even then, I would probably be the person that would say, well, this would make my life a lot easier. But if it can't be done, it's fine, I'll work around it, which I know is not right, but that's just the person I am.
And do you think having these conversations, since you've been on this campaign, do you feel like now that's shifted at all?
It's like everything, until you're in that situation, you're not actually gonna know. I would like to think that it's helped me, and if I was in that situation, I would be able to, but I don't know.
I think there's a fear, isn't there, that everybody, if you're looking at a job and you particularly want that job, there's this fear of, if I say something, I might be rejected. And when you've gone through a lot of applications and you've been turned away a lot, it's because you don't want to be turned away that maybe you don't tell them too much in the beginning. I mean, I knew I could do a job a few years back and I didn't say anything. But then when I said something about a condition I was having, a flare-up that I was having, and the lady said, you should have told us about that because health and safety say that if anything happened at work and we didn't know about it, it would fall back on us.
Rachel, you asked the question about whether or not, do we tick the box that says, do you have a disability? You've been looking for work recently. What's your...
I had to say yes because I'm in a wheelchair. But then I'm getting interviews, but only because they've... I feel that people are interviewing you because they've then interviewed a disabled person, not because they've seen my skills and what I can bring to the company, but they've got statistics they need to fill. And so I've got an interview.
So that's the guaranteed interview box.
Yeah.
How do other people feel about guaranteed interviews?
I'm absolutely ticking that box. I'm not ashamed of my disability. I'm not going to hide behind, the fact that I didn't tick that box. No, I will tick that box, and I will quite happily be somebody's box ticking exercise if that works for me. I know that if I get an employer that wants to, every time they need to do some promotional photographs, they go, oh, let's get Wayne and he can stand there with his stick and, we can show that we're an inclusive company and, they're doing it for the wrong reasons. But if that does ultimately mean that I can get myself paid employment, then, I'm going to use that to benefit me. The moment that they step over that line, I'm gutsy enough to put my foot down, and I understand that not everybody is forthright like that. I do get it that you kind of double guess yourself, like, do I tick the box, do I not, do I say something, do I keep quiet? And I don't think you should keep quiet. You are who you are, and I don't think you're being true to yourself. My opinion, I don't think you're being true to yourself if you kind of hide. And I do understand. You might have sent out 100 CVs, applied for 200 different jobs, and then there's that one that comes up and you're like, oh, that would be my absolute dream job. But I think you've also got to look at it as, if you tick that box and then something's not quite right, that's an early warning indicator that maybe it's not the dream job that you thought it was.
Well, I've always ticked the box. I feel after ticking the box, maybe they should put down what reasonable adjustments you might need for that role. So when they interview you, they get a better idea of your needs. But also, I don't think employers should just interview a person because they just tick the box. They should look at their skills and experience and what they can bring to the role and the team.
And just picking up on a point I know we talked about before, which was flexibility. Flexibility of recruitment. I think there's something about, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. And I know that in some of the conversations we've had before, we were saying that, what are the things that would help right from when the job is advertised, right from how you have that interview. Some people are so much better over Zoom. Some people hate Zoom. So I think those are also flexibilities that can be put in right from the outset.
I think there's also an assumption that every disabled person wants to work from home, and that flexible working has been this amazing adjustment because it means that, actually employers don't have to make adjustments in work. They can just say to disabled employees, job seekers, well, actually, the adjustment is that you work from home. But actually, it's about choice, isn't it, as well? And actually, if you've got non-disabled people going into work, then the option also has to be there for disabled people to go into work in exactly the same way.
I think it'd be really nice to go around before we sign out and check out with a question. If you had sort of a magic wand, what's the one thing that an employer could do or has done for you that would have improved or has improved your working life?
Probably listen to what reasonable adjustments I need for that role. Also, work with other organisations to have better understanding on disability. What's worked for me in the past is having a charity supporting me in open employment.
For me, it would be allowing me to give me a chance to try out something that I asked for. So listening really, and allowing me to give something a go to see if it worked and help me better, instead of saying a short answer, no, it's not allowed.
Magic wand, carte blanche. Every employer in Gloucestershire has to be an accredited member of the Empowered Employers Scheme. They all have to do training. They all have to show where they've made improvements. They all need to have a proper action plan, a wellness policy, and just be present and be, forward thinking in the fact that, we might be disabled, but that doesn't mean we can't do the job just as well as an able-bodied person.
The only job that I've had since being disabled is one that I've made up myself, and it was working from home, and I taught boccia out in the community, and I absolutely loved it. And so that would be my ideal job, because I was working from home, and then in the afternoons I was coaching boccia. I could work day on, day off, day on, day off, and the days off I recovered, and then so I could recuperate for the next day.
And you carved that out in your own way.
I did, yes, because no one would
wonderful.
take me on. What do you do?
Do you mind me asking how that came to an end?
The pandemic, because I went out to the community, and so it was very hard at the time to go out to the residential homes. Also, the rules of boccia changed because you had to be so many metres apart. I mean, we used to play with them in the dining room, just throwing balls around the boccia, around the place. And you can't do it anymore. It's something that I did. It started off at club, took the club on, then I took it out to the community. When I realised that people in the community weren't coming to the club, I had a brainwave when I was off, had treatment, and it worked, and people loved it, and we had a great time, didn't we, Kay?
Yeah, very good.
It's an Olympic sport that we actually have the gold medalists.
Yes, David Smith.
David Smith is an Olympic gold medalist, yeah. It's a sport we're really good at.
Maybe a bit of a cop-out, but I'm completely with Wayne. Just get employers to do the course and just show evidence that they're actually giving a damn.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, well
Perfectly
said.
put.
I think that's a really good note to end on, actually.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Empowered Employers podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the campaign, you can visit empoweredemployers.co.uk or contact Barnwood Trust on 01242 539 935.